Well, today we're going to look at the people who provided the financial underpinning of Nazi Germany. And um, it's to emphasize the point that as we understand history and as it is presented to us, we focus on the one evildoer. And there's many more who have created fertile ground for the evildoer to emerge and succeed. So their culpability is often overlooked, pushed aside, if discussed at all. In my, of course, I'm one who, certainly was influenced by that material, and as a child believed Hitler was a lone madman, much like Lee Harvey Oswald was characterized. Anyway, the it's when you get to who's behind the scenes that you get to understand the what I think is the more deplorable aspects of it all. Let's take a look.
Germany, 1942. The Third Reich is at the height of its power. With the help of finance from large corporations inside and outside of Germany, Adolf Hitler has conquered almost half of Europe in less than 4 years.
In the beginning of the war, and even later for the Americans, it was legal to do business with Germany.
When Hitler takes power in 1933, there are a number of American corporations that are already heavily invested in the German market. When the politics of Germany begin to change, they simply say, we can't withdraw because we would lose too much of our investment. And so American companies are therefore right at the heart of the Third Reich's industrial machinery.
I just wanted to note that that's Bradley Hart, who we've read about in other classes about the Nazis in America. He's the author of that.
In every country they invaded, the Nazis seized both state and private assets in order to help pay for the war expenses of the Reich. Much of the loot would also find its way directly into the pockets of Hitler and his cronies.
You know, this is basically sort of profiteering in a kind of mafia style. This is just theft.
Neutral countries would not only turn a blind eye to the looting of the continent, but would even, in some cases, become complicit in the crime.
All these countries broke international law. Nobody seemed to care at that time. They wanted to be on the side of who was going to be powerful in Europe.
Millions would be enslaved for the growth of the Nazi war machine. Even the bodies of their victims would be turned by the Nazis into profit.
Imagine how many people it takes to fill up crates of teeth with gold filled. And they would get these, they would extract the metal and smelt it into bars of precious metals, be it silver, gold, or whatnot.
But in the end, what was it all for?
Hitler was a war junkie. You know, the more he did war, the more he wanted to finance war. And as we know, with all people in those situations, things get worse and worse. And they did for Hitler.
Paris, June the 23rd, 1940. Adolf Hitler walks triumphantly into the streets. The City of Lights has been covered by the dark blanket of Nazism. Inside the same wagon where the German Imperial Army had signed its capitulation in 1918, it's now the French who will submit to the whims of Europe's new overlord. Three days later, a group of prominent American businessmen are having dinner in New York City. They're celebrating the Nazi victory on the Western Front. The group is hosted by German lawyer Gerhard Alois Westrick.
So Westrick is one of the most colorful figures in the German economic and sort of political scene in this period. In the 1920s, he'd been an attorney who'd worked with a number of American companies in Germany. And in the 1930s, when Hitler takes power, he becomes really a commercial attaché who's working on behalf of the Third Reich in the United States.
In the years after Hitler was chancellor, from 33 to 39, the beginning of the war, and even later for the Americans, it was legal to do business with Germany. And Germany is one of the major industrial countries in the world, so naturally the banks were doing all kinds of business with them.
In Germany, Gerhard Alois Westrick's law firm represents an impressive list of clients, including Ford, General Motors, Kodak, Texas Oil, and IT&T. From 1938, he also served as chairman of IT&T's German operation. In 1940, these deep connections to the American corporate establishment prompt Nazi Foreign Minister Joachim von Ribbentrop to send Westrick on an extensive U.S. tour. The tour was officially referred to as a trade mission for the Reich, but the real purpose of the mission was somewhat different.
Westrick makes American businessmen a fascinating offer. He says, look, if you can help prevent the U.S. from getting into the war and help Germany establish some sort of a new order in Europe, I can help you get your profits out of Nazi Germany. It's a deal that many American businessmen would have been very tempted by.
In other words, Westrick was hoping that the businessmen he met could lobby President Roosevelt to help make America a neutral peace broker between the Reich and the European allies, while canceling the supply of weapons to the British and the French, whom the Nazis regarded as fair game. This proposal interested some of the businessmen who wanted to improve their long-term investments in Germany. But as always with Hitler, there was a catch. In his commitment to spur investment and build up the industrial capacity of the country, Hitler had introduced tariffs and economic measures designed to protect the Deutschmark and penalize foreign investors.
Ja, die ausländischen Direktinvestitionen spielen zu der Zeit eigentlich keine Rolle. Einfach weil es für Ausländer nicht attraktiv war, in Deutschland zu investieren. Nämlich es war schwer, wieder Waren aus Deutschland zu reexportieren. Zweiter Grund war, dass es auch schwer war, Gewinne aus Deutschland wieder zu repatriieren, das heißt in die USA zu überweisen, weil es eine strikte Devisenbewirtschaftung gab. Jedoch gibt es auch kein großes ausländisches Unternehmen, das damals sein Engagement in Deutschland beendet hatte.
Despite the challenges of moving assets and profits out of the Reich, several foreign companies would keep their businesses going in Germany, either out of economic necessity or political sympathy. To avoid the punitive export tariffs, some of these corporations would deal in a direct barter system with the Nazi state, supplying raw materials in exchange for manufactured products. These companies included Texas Oil under its pro-Nazi chairman, Norwegian-born Torkild Rieber.
He first gets on the radar of the American government because he's expressing, it seems, some sympathies with Nazi Germany. But more importantly, when Gerhard Alois Westrick comes to the United States, Rieber actually buys him a car. And Westrick, on the registration for his American driver's license, puts the Texas company's address as his residence. And so there's a clear connection between Rieber, the Texas company, and Westrick. And then certainly he's very happy to do business with the Nazis. Whether or not he's ideologically attracted to Nazism, I think, is kind of a difficult question to answer. But certainly he sees business potential in the Reich.
By this time, a new American company developed a revolutionary technology that enabled the Nazis to catalog all the plundered loot from Poland. It also used the same technology to create a population census for the entire Greater German Reich. That company would expand its operations alongside the Nazi Empire. The company was called the International Business Machines Corporation, or IBM.
So in the 1920s, IBM had acquired a German company called De Homag, which was essentially building machines somewhat similar to IBM's, but because of the economic circumstances of Germany in the 20s, was in dire financial straits. So IBM and Thomas Watson come in and acquire De Homag at pennies on the dollar. And now they have a huge entrance into the German market.
Having been founded in Germany in 1910 by Willy Heidinger to manufacture punch cards for tabulating machines, in 1923, 90% of the company was acquired by American businessman Thomas J. Watson, who would merge it into a German subsidiary of his company, IBM. When Hitler gets nominated as chancellor in 1933, IBM Deamag offers its services to the new Nazi government.
We have to understand the Nazis' obsession with numbers. The Nazis see themselves as a technocratic regime. They want to know everything about their population, and they want to know everything about the populations of countries that they're going to be occupying and territories that they see the need for demographic shift in. IBM's technology is used in Germany to begin counting the population and arranging it in certain ways for demographers, effectively. And so we see a very clear lineage, essentially, between the German government's efforts to begin counting its citizens and understanding the demographics religiously and, as they would see it, racially within the country, and the events that happened later on during the Holocaust.
At a meeting in Berlin in 1937, IBM chairman Thomas J. Watson was elected president of the International Chamber of Commerce. Like Henry Ford and James D. Mooney, Watson was also awarded the Order of the German Eagle for his services to strengthening relations between the United States and Nazi Germany. But when the Nazis start invading neighboring countries, Watson, unlike Ford and Mooney, denounced Hitler's regime and returned his medal.
When Watson actually gives back his medal, Diplomat is outraged because this is obviously a slap in the face to the German government, and it could definitely affect their business. And so that's when we begin to see the separation between Diplomat in Germany and IBM's sort of headquarters in the United States. And it's a separation that actually will be very timely for IBM because Diplomat will continue to do its work for the German government.
Now, with the war raging American businessmen in the German war effort would be Sostenes Ben, the owner of the International Telephone and Telegraph Corporation. IT&T held shares in companies like Focke-Wulf that built fighter planes for the Luftwaffe. They also had a stake in Signalbau Huth in Berlin, which built communication equipment for the Wehrmacht. Bain would meet frequently with his German contacts, Gerhard Alois Festrick and Nazi banker Kurt Baron von Schroeder in Switzerland.
Certainly, if your company is under Nazi occupation, has a Nazi board of directors at that point, it's difficult to convince them to do anything when you're thousands of miles away. But it certainly seems to be the case that Ford and General Motors directors didn't take the affirmative steps they would have needed to in the period before the war to ensure that those plants were not available for German war production. And that, I think, is where the real ambiguity lies here.
For heavy industrial businesses within the Reich, there was no option but to submit to Hitler's demands, which were only going to grow as time went on.
What Hitler completely understands is that the expropriation of all these sort of national financial reserves, these industries, these infrastructures in all these countries is only going to solve the German deficit on a temporary basis. He's like a drug addict. He knows he's going to have to get more and more and more to feed this credit habit that he's got.
And Pearl Harbor also created opportunities for the Nazis to gain favor.
And even as German forces were bidding to take control of the vast resources of the Soviet Empire, on December 7th, 1941, its ally, Imperial Japan, launched its sneak attack of the U.S. base at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. 4 days later, Hitler declared war against the United States. Although this would sever trading relations between the two nations, many American industrialists were powerless to stop their subsidiary operations in Germany from producing and trading with the Nazi Reich.
So most of the American subsidiaries simply continue their operations as they existed on December 1st, 1941. There's really no major change that we see taking place. Partially this is because the German companies themselves have largely broken free of American control at that point. The Nazi Party has installed loyalists onto their boards of directors. They have mandated these companies engage in the war effort in some way. So a lot of these companies simply don't have a choice. If they wanted to shut down their operations in Europe, they couldn't have at that stage.
But there would be some American companies that would willfully continue to deal with the Nazi Reich in a clear violation of the U.S. Trading with the Enemy Act. Companies like Standard Oil.
A small but dangerous minority of industrial managers who perhaps hold out for extra profits or for business as usual.
So by early 1942, the U.S. government is increasingly concerned that American companies are not only still doing business with the Reich, but that they're helping the German war effort. And of course, that accusation is correct. And so they begin looking at all of this involvement, all of this corporate involvement in the Reich, and they pinpoint Standard Oil as one of the companies that is probably still doing an appreciable amount of business to help the German war effort.
At that time, the president of Standard Oil, James Walter C. Teagle, was also a director of the American subsidiaries of IG Farben. The combined companies were known as Standard IG.
They're sharing patents and essentially helping IG Farben increase the octane content of its gasoline. Now, this is incredibly important later on for the Luftwaffe and other German military establishments.
After the Pearl Harbor attack, the U.S. Navy approached Standard Oil to provide synthetic materials vital for the American war effort. Incredibly, even after America's declaration of war against Japan and Nazi Germany, Walter C. Teagle refused to renege on his existing deals with IG Farben. A congressional investigation was launched, and the chairman of the presiding special committee, Senator Harry S. Truman, accused the corporation of treason.
And so Teagle makes a deal with the American government. Effectively, Standard Oil is such a big player on the American economic scene that you don't want to punish it during the Second World War, or so he argues. And so Teagle agrees to give up his position at Standard Oil a year before he's supposed to retire, and effectively the U.S. government agrees that they won't pursue what they could have really done against Standard Oil, which is antitrust cases or other forms of punishment for the company. Standard is not the only oil company that will enter this type of activity in Germany. The Texas company will continue to make shipments to Germany throughout the 1930s and even after the start of the Second World War. A Texas oilman named William Rhodes Davis actually begins selling cut-rate Mexican oil to the Third Reich and continues doing it as long as he can until the British blockade cuts off his tankers from getting to German ports. And so we see that the American oil industry is able and willing to provide this incredibly critical resource to the Third Reich even after the war has begun.
But in other cases, the U.S. government successfully froze the assets of many companies that dealt with the Nazis, severing important links in the German industrial supply lines. Now, fighting a war on two fronts against two of the world's largest and best resourced countries, Hitler needed his friends in industry and finance more than ever. Autumn 1942. The war begins to change for Hitler and the Nazis. In Russia, the Red Army counterattacks against the Wehrmacht, and the myth of German military supremacy is shattered in devastating defeats at Stalingrad and Leningrad. In the early years of the war, Hitler could count on the Soviet Union and U.S. companies for the raw materials to feed his war machine. But now, as his armies were bogged down in the east, he could only rely on a few close allies and fellow fascist regimes for those things.
The Portuguese were a neutral country, but run by Antonio Salazar, who was a fascist dictator. So the Nazis were buying wolfram and other important resources that they needed for their war machine.
Spanien war wichtig als Lieferant für Wolfram, ein knappes, teures und kriegswichtiges Metall. Schweden war wichtig als Lieferant für Eisenerz, ohne den Stahl nicht produziert werden kann. Schweden war die wichtigste Eisenerzquelle des Deutschen Reiches.
You've also got chromite from Turkey, and then you've got Spanish and Portuguese ports that are being used for shipments destined to the Third Reich. And these are being conducted by American corporations using neutral flags on their ships. So, you know, it looks neutral, but it ain't neutral.
Even after the Pearl Harbor attack, less scrupulous American businessmen would hold secret meetings with German trade delegations in these so-called neutral countries, where they would establish shell companies in a bid to continue to benefit from the growth of the Nazi war machine. Some influential players in American industry and commerce saw Imperial Japan, rather than Germany, as their real enemy.
So they just did this in secret by setting up all these LLCs, but all of these shell companies that you couldn't trace back to the Nazis, but that they were controlled by them, and that's how they hid what they were doing.
But if visits to nearby Spain and Portugal provided the perfect cover for business meetings between Nazi government officials and their Western industrial and commercial counterparts, the most popular stopping-off point to hide their own stolen loot was undoubtedly neighboring Switzerland.
So you had a lot of high-ranking Nazis with Swiss bank accounts. Hitler had a bank account at the Union Bank of Switzerland where he deposited the royalties to Mein Kampf. I mean, go figure. Like, everybody was using Swiss banks. It was a thing.
Die Schweiz lieferte beispielsweise einige.
And if you reflect on our class about Trump and money laundering, we've learned a lot about shell companies and doing business with foreign banks. I also want to take a look at how companies used enslaved labor to maximize their profits.
IG Farben, the company that built a factory at Auschwitz. IG Farben was Germany's largest chemical conglomerate, formed in 1925 from the merger of 6 major chemical companies. By the 1930s, IG Farben controlled over 200 subsidiaries and was one of the most powerful corporations in Europe. When Hitler came to power, IG Farben aligned itself with the Nazi regime. The company produced Zyklon B, the poison gas used in gas chambers, and synthetic fuel, explosives, and rubber essential to the German war effort. In 1941, IG Farben decided to build a massive synthetic rubber plant near the town of Auschwitz in occupied Poland. The location was chosen specifically because of its proximity to Auschwitz concentration camp, an endless supply of slave labor. The plant, called Bühnewerke or Monowitz, became Auschwitz III. By December 1944, almost 4,000 prisoners worked there, with a total of approximately 35,000 passing through the facility during the war. An estimated 25,000 of them died from exhaustion, starvation, beatings, or were sent to the gas chambers when they became too weak to work. IG Farben paid the SS for the use of these prisoners. The company did not feed them adequately, did not provide medical care, and worked them 12-hour shifts in brutal conditions. When prisoners collapsed, they were replaced. The company's executives knew exactly what was happening. Internal documents recovered after the war showed that IG Farben managers visited the plant, inspected the workers, and discussed production targets that required maximizing labor output while minimizing costs. One historian later described IG Farben's Bühne plant as a factory of death. The goal wasn't just to produce synthetic rubber, it was to extract maximum economic value from human beings before they died. Imagine being a Jewish prisoner at Auschwitz, selected not for the gas chamber, but for work at the Bühne plant. You're marched several kilometers each day to the factory, given minimal food, and forced to work 12-hour shifts carrying heavy materials, operating dangerous machinery, and building structures in all weather. You watch as prisoners around you collapse and die. You know that when you become too weak, you'll be sent back to Birkenau to be murdered. And you know that the executives of IG Farben, sitting in comfortable offices in Frankfurt, are profiting from every hour of your suffering. Krupp, weapons factories next to death camps. Krupp was Germany's most famous armaments manufacturer, a family-owned business that had supplied weapons to German armies for over a century. Under the leadership of Gustav Krupp and later his son Alfred, the company became a pillar of the Nazi war effort. Krupp built factories adjacent to concentration camps specifically to access slave labor. The company used prisoners from Auschwitz, Buchenwald, Gross-Rosen, Flossenburg, and Mittelbau-Dora. Conditions in Krupp facilities were among the worst of any corporate user of slave labor. Prisoners worked in munitions factories where explosions and toxic chemicals were constant hazards. Safety equipment was minimal or non-existent. Guards beat workers who slowed down or made mistakes. Historians estimate that approximately 70,000 people died in Krupp facilities during the war. Unlike IG Farben, which at least maintained the pretense that it was running an industrial operation, Krupp's facilities often functioned as extermination through labor sites, places where prisoners were deliberately worked to death. After the war, captured documents revealed that Krupp executives had explicitly requested concentration camp labor and had designed production facilities around the assumption that workers would be disposable. The company's internal correspondence showed no concern for prisoner welfare and focused entirely on maximizing output. Other corporate collaborators, a system-wide phenomenon, IG, Farben and Krupp were not isolated cases. Major German corporations across industries exploited forced and slave labor. Siemens used prisoners from Auschwitz and other camps to produce electrical equipment and communication systems. The company built facilities near Ravensbrück, the largest concentration camp for women, to access female slave labor. BMW used forced laborers at plants near Dachau, Buchenwald, and other camps to produce aircraft engines. Of the company's workforce during the war, thousands were prisoners or foreign forced laborers. Volkswagen employed prisoners from Neuengamme concentration camp. The company's wartime production relied heavily on slave labor, with prisoners manufacturing military vehicles and components. Daimler-Benz, now Mercedes-Benz, used forced labor from multiple camps, including Sachsenhausen. Skilled Jewish workers were exploited until they were weak enough to be sent to extermination camps. Bayer, part of IG Farben until 1945, used slave labor from Mauthausen and conducted medical experiments on prisoners. Heinkel aircraft manufacturer employed between 6,000 and 8,000 prisoners from Sachsenhausen concentration camp to build bombers. The company maintained barracks surrounded by barbed wire and machine gun towers. The list goes on. Zeiss Ikon, Shell, IBM, Ford, General Motors. Even companies based in neutral or allied countries found ways to profit from Nazi slave labor through subsidiaries or partnerships. This wasn't a few rogue corporations. It was a system-wide phenomenon involving hundreds of companies and millions of forced laborers. Between 1947 and 1949, the Allies conducted a series of additional trials at Nuremberg targeting industrialists, doctors, judges, and other professionals who had enabled Nazi crimes. The most significant for our purposes were the IG Farben trial, 1947 to 1948, and the Krupp trial, 1947 to 1948. The IG Farben trial charged 24 executives with war crimes, including enslaving and murdering concentration camp prisoners. Prosecutors argued that IG Farben had deliberately built the Buna plan at Auschwitz to exploit slave labor, and that executives were complicit in mass murder. The verdicts were shockingly lenient. 13 defendants were convicted, but none received more than 8 years in prison. Many were released early due to pressure from West German business interests and Cold War politics. By the mid-1950s, almost all the convicted IG Farben executives were free. IG Farben itself was broken up into its constituent companies after the war. Those successor companies include Bayer, BASF, and Höchst, brands that exist and thrive today. The Krupp trial charged Alfred Krupp and 11 directors with using slave labor and plundering occupied territories. Alfred was convicted and sentenced to 12 years in prison with his property confiscated. But in 1951, under pressure from the US government, which wanted to rebuild West Germany as a Cold War ally, Alfred Krupp was released, his property was returned, and he resumed control of the company. He went on to become one of the wealthiest men in Germany. The prosecutors at Nuremberg argued that corporate executives had made possible the Nazi war machine and its genocides. But the sentences and early releases sent a different message, that using slave labor and profiting from genocide were not serious enough crimes to warrant meaningful punishment. Think about the message this sent. If you're a corporate executive and you enslave tens of thousands of people, work them to death, and profit enormously, and your punishment is a few years in comfortable detention followed by a return to wealth and power, what incentive do you have to behave differently in the future? The economic miracle, corporate criminals rebuild Germany. In the 1950s and 1960s, West Germany experienced the Wirtschaftswunder, the economic miracle. The country rebuilt rapidly, becoming one of the wealthiest nations in Europe. That miracle was built in part by the same corporations and executives who had enslaved millions during the war. Companies like Krupp, Siemens, BMW, Volkswagen, and the successor firms of IG Farben became pillars of the West German economy. Many of the executives who had overseen
Lost audio.
There's no easy answer, but the question itself matters. The uncomfortable Charta truth. Here's what we know. Germany's most prestigious corporations deliberately and systematically exploited slave labor from concentration camps to maximize profits during World War II. They requested prisoners, paid the SS, and worked human beings to death in factories built adjacent to gas chambers. Executives made these decisions in boardrooms, calculated the costs and benefits, and concluded that slavery was good for business. After the war, most faced no punishment or received sentences so light they were back in power within a few years. The companies thrived in the post-war period, becoming global brands. Compensation for survivors came decades late and was widely inadequate. And today, many of these corporations still exist, still profit, still carry the wealth built on blood. If you drive a BMW, take medication from Bayer, use products from BASF or Siemens, or work for any of dozens of companies involved in Nazi crimes, you're interacting with institutions whose current wealth is partially derived from slavery and genocide. That doesn't make you complicit, but it does make you a participant in an economic system that has never fully confronted or repaired these crimes. Some crimes are too great to forgive. Some debts are too large to repay, but acknowledging them, remembering them, refusing to forget or minimize them, that's the least we can do. If
Hold on now. Let me do this. And so we have things that follow patterns. It's, if you recall, when we talked about Barbados and working people to death there, this is a technique that isn't new. There's nothing original here. The that the only thing that matters is stockholder wealth really is exemplary of the kind of horrible things that we have witnessed. And I just want to, in the For What It's Worth department, look at the issues of today that, let me get this up on the current slide, of the things that we have going on right now. He resigned as the CEO of Binance after pleading guilty to charges he violated bank secrecy, international emergency economic powers. Zhao was given a presidential pardon by Donald Trump. The FBI arrested Ulbricht and took Silk Road offline. In 2015, he was convicted of engaging in a continuing criminal enterprise, distributing narcotics by means of the internet, conspiracy to commit money laundering, conspiracy to traffic fraudulent identity documents, and computer hacking. He was sentenced to 2 life sentences, plus 40 years without the possibility of parole. He too has been given a pass. And here's, Balontini, bribery, the drug dealing Honduran president, again, given a pardon. So there's, this stuff kind of continues going on. Anyway, with that, Dave, we can open up for discussion.
Please raise your hand and ask a brief question so everybody's got a chance to ask questions. And
And while people are contemplating that, I did want to read one more excerpt. We know about the Dulles brothers, John and Foster Dulles.
Yep.
You go in and out of John's airport every now and then in Washington. After World War I, Germany was financially strapped. War cost and reparations strained Germany beyond its resources. America, led by John Foster Dulles of the law firm Sullivan and Cromwell, orchestrated financing for Germany, ultimately fueling German rearmament. When he returned to Berlin, according to Stephen Kinzer in his book about the brothers, he found conditions worse and had what he called a sinister impression. He was disturbed by stories he heard from Jewish clients and worried about the implication of Sullivan and Cromwell's work fueling German financial and industrial power. Nazism became the first and only important subject on which the Dulles brothers seriously disagreed. Allen sensed what was coming and wished to spare Sullivan and Cromwell the stigma of collaboration. Foster could not bear to turn away.
And the
Where do
Dulles,
we even begin? This is just so horrifying. And all firms that we know today. Sorry, Dave, I stepped on you.
Yeah, no, but I think it's listen to commercials. American family life, we care about you and your family. Subaru, we want you to be safe with your family as you go on vacation. All this stuff about how they care about the common good and human decency. And this is a theme that comes through time and time again. But it's all a sham. You get behind the curtain and, here's somebody who is covered with insurance and needs a procedure done, but the insurance company says, no, that's not approved. It is this greed, this insatiable, we got to get more and straight. Mind you, I know there's a lot of people who are excited about AI, right? Um, Look at all the money that's being pumped into the primary campaigns. Where's that money coming from? I'd look at AI because they want to control who's going to write the rules and regulations, if any, that could constrain their ability to become exceedingly wealthy and powerful.
Kay wants to know, what is the company CROP in the caption?
That's Krupp. It's your Krupp coffee makers.
Yep.
That's it. It's Krupp. CRUPP.
Not KRUPP?
Didn't I say KRUPP?
C.
You did. You said C, and I thought it was K also.
K, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Oh my gosh. It's like every brand we know.
Look, IG Farben, was eventually broken up, but the companies that came under their cartel are still operating. They're repairing elevators in America and selling chemicals in America. This is they really, some went to prison for a period of time, but not very long. for what they did. And look at the people of great power and wealth who are convicted of crimes, some of which they confess to, who are getting pardons.
And given money for it.
Oh. Lewis?
Thank you very much. Yes. Well, Sal, it's sad that this is your last. Can't we get an encore next week? I don't know. I remember as a kid, my mother really liked opera, and there was Saturday opera from the Met from New York, sponsored by Texaco. And I learned later they vowed to do this forever in partial penance of what they did and how they thought about World War II and the fascists. So, have other companies? What have some of the other companies do? Are you aware of some of the attempts for forgiveness or recognition of their problems?
No. Look, in the run up to World War II, FDR, one of the most extraordinary presidents that we've had, who really had a sense of strategy of let's identify problems and deal with them. He wanted to know from his war planners where are we vulnerable? What raw materials do we need? What public relations problems do we have? And the Justice Department looked at the fact that they still had peonage. That's where they continued slavery, because you would owe me money if you're a sharecropper or whatever. And at the end of the quarter, the end of the year, we'd calculate up what you're supposed to earn, but then we would deduct all the expenses that we put forward for you. And at the end, you owed us money. And so you couldn't leave. You were freed as a slave, but you still held in bondage by way of peonage. And we had laws to prevent that, but they weren't enforced. So FDR then directs the Justice Department to start enforcing those laws, because it could be used as public relations against America to show that we are still a slave nation. They also categorically said, if we go to war, this was before 1941, but it was, if we go to war, might have been in the early 30s, we will absolutely lose, because our military operations hinge upon the availability of rubber. And the rubber resources in the world are under the control of the people we expect to be our adversaries. And so there then was a need, they had to come up with synthetic rubber. Well, the Texas Oil Company was involved with IG Farben, and IG Farben had begun working on synthetic rubber and synthetic oil that they could then use for the war machine. And when it came for Texas Oil Company to now take that technology and share it with other American companies who are looking to deal with this problem, they wouldn't do it. They wouldn't do it. To hell with it. And mind you, we will lose if we don't get synthetic rubber. So it's the idea that And mind you, not every company would sell out their country for profits, but Ford and General Motors, ITT, I mean, today, it's just Coca-Cola. Fanta was a product of Coca-Cola wanting to continue making its product and selling it in Germany, only not under the Coke name, under Fanta. So, it's I go back to where's the root of the problem? Greed. And I know that sounds like, I want to legislate morality. You can't make someone moral, but you can put the boundaries up, the guardrails up, to say that if you do these kinds of things, you're going to get punished. So if a company realized, if we jump in bed with Hitler, we may be precluded from doing business in America. Oh well, that might alter your your judgment. And consider now with the as AI is coming on, it doesn't have to be attached to a spot, right? It doesn't have to be an American company. It can be a company that's in anywhere on the planet. And it has no connection with a country. And there will be deep ties into other countries who may be adversaries of America. I think one of the things that comes through in the book of Sven Beckert, A History of Capitalism, is his emphasis on that the state has an imperative role in capitalism and in what's done with capitalism. That's also going to be very true about AI.
So Sal, if we continue on about the courts and so forth, what type of a court system was used for the civilian industrialists and so forth in Germany? Was it under the occupation, therefore a military court, or was it involving the German former court system?
No, the Nuremberg court.
Okay.
It dealt with the first row of Nazis. Then it went on into businesses and others. There were multiple trials that took place.
And were there any trials here in the U.S. for U.S. businessmen that were? Okay.
No, and no U.S. businessmen were put on trial at Nuremberg.
Were any of the people like the bankers, Rockefellers? Well, Rockefellers had banking, they had oil and whatever.
No, they weren't. Yeah.
Based on your thesis, do you believe that Canada should not do any deals with the United States today?
Based on that thesis, my thoughts are that Canada is handling the hostility that has come from the American government in a very appropriate way. And that is initiating the disconnection from America and forming attachments with other allies, seeking other allies. It's like the person who's in a bad marriage and starts looking for another partner before they get out of the marriage, right? And then gets it established and then says, "Oh, well, I think I need a divorce now." I mean, that's kind of what I think is going on. And I don't think that's inappropriate. I think,
How about the rest of
why?
Europe?
I'm sorry?
How about the rest of Europe? Should the EU stop dealing with the United States?
Well, the tough thing is you want to if say, is this an anomaly that's going on? Is this an aberration? Or is this where America is going? Now, I would argue that this moment may appear as an aberration, but this moment is a product of a political force that has been operating for 75 years and actually is an extension of the Civil War and an extension of the conflict that was there at the very beginning of the country over, we want to tout freedom and justice while we're enslaving people and killing Indians. So I would want to look at it from a broad picture and discern, is this a pattern? And what I see is the thing that was an aberration was America in World War II. FDR was the aberration. Donald Trump has a lot more in common with George Washington than FDR had with George Washington. So if that's the pattern, my calculation is that if we look far enough ahead, they are a predator, and we need to defend against the predator, and adjust ourselves accordingly. If we want long-term sustainability, if I am France or Italy or Portugal, I would be looking at long-term sustainability. Is a relationship with America good or bad? And I hate to say, in my analysis, it would come down on the negative.
Lewis?
Thank you. Sal, you actually gave me an entry into what I was going to discuss, sustainability. Under the current administration, and if this goes on, you can't even mention the name sustainability.
Yeah,
you
right.
can't mention the name EV. You can't mention the name of DE&I. So I've just been reviewing the EU's regulations for purchases of various stuff, and from how an engineer designs and so forth. And they are demanding a lot of sustainable conditions in the products that are being designed and manufactured. And our engineers are not trained that way yet. There's a tremendous culture of sustainability going on in the EU countries. And an example that just came up where the EU has said, Apple, you cannot sell the iPhone the way it is now because the materials are not sustainability. It cannot be repaired. You cannot replace the battery, and those all have to be conditions of what they call the circular economy, the life cycle, all those types of things. So I'm actually looking at and discussing with some of our engineering colleges about how we can get sustainability culture started in some of our classes. So we're way behind then, and will be, especially if the administration continues on. We just won't be able to sell stuff that will be accepted in EU countries.
Yeah, let me just reference the book by Jeffrey Sachs from Columbia. He had a book that's probably 10 years ago about sustainability. I don't remember the exact title. I'd probably find it, but it's dense, but it's very good. Most of it is over my head. Honestly, it just not that astute in those in the technologies. But he certainly makes the point that we exist on a globe that has resources. Our being was a product of the chemicals and the minerals that came together on this planet. And so when you start damaging those things, you're essentially killing yourself. There's not an unlimited supply of air, you know? And so there are several who have scientists, academics, who have said we cannot go on living as we live and growing as we grow because it's not sustainable. So it's like when they buy up a big piece of land in the neighborhood where you live and tear down all the trees and put up a new $1 million mega house in it's that kind of thing can't go on because we're running out of space, we're running out of food, we're running out of everything. So it's a huge issue. It won't affect our generation, but we're on a path. The dinosaurs were lucky; they had a meteor hit them, and what happens to them? Right, the meteor hits, it kills a bunch of them, but then it contaminates the environment, and they're now under a cloud for a long period of time. Ice ages and all that stuff kill off all the trees. Things become deserts. That's what ultimately kills off the dinosaurs. They didn't have sustainable life after the meteor hit. But they're big issues and big questions. And there was a report the other day about how the young generation is responding to political issues and that they have a sensitivity to sustainability. But they don't think that our government is capable of handling it. That when you look at what it is that they're wrapped up in, I mean, the leadership of our country is trying to figure out ways to siphon off money from the treasury into its pocket. What the hell is that going to do about sustainability, about clean air, usable water, sense? Hell, I'm the president. I should not be subject to taxation for the rest of my life, nor my family. Nor anyone that carries my DNA will never be taxed again. And then you have people in power around them who are saying, yeah, that's okay. When I did the class on the murder of JFK, I still have people who attended that class, which was years ago, stop me when I'm at an event, a Suga event, and say, I really like that class, but you were way out there. You were way out there. That kind of thing couldn't just happen. You mean, and I'm way out there? Look at the president is saying, I want to pay the people who try to overthrow the government. That's a lot more wild than my saying Lee Harvey Oswald didn't kill Kennedy. So, goodness. Hey, Bob.
Hi, Sal. Yeah, I was reading that book you recommended about post-war Europe. I didn't finish it because it's very long.
Yeah.
But there's a picture in the middle of the book about when the Russians liberated one of the concentration camps, and they walked a young boy along the path where there were a lot of suffering and or dead people, and they wanted the young boy to look at the suffering or dead people, and instead he looked the other way. And we've all seen those pictures similar to that. And I thought of a song from the 60s by Pete Seeger, which had a verse in it which went like this, something like this. We didn't know, said the Burgomeister, about the camp on the edge of town. It was Hitler and his crew who tore the German nation down. You know, the people in the adjacent town, maybe who worked in the factories and so forth, they didn't want to know anything. So they didn't.
Well, first, I know there was a question came up, wanted to know which book. That's The Post-War
Yeah,
by Tony Judt.
yes.
He was an NYU professor.
I didn't
Spell
finish
last
it
name?
because it had a lot of pages.
Yeah, and yeah, and look, I think what I find so interesting about this current time for America is it should give us insight into what the German people did during the 1930s and 40s. There's nothing we can do about it, right? I mean, it's that sense of helplessness so that you turn your head away. Um, uh, Goodness, I have friends where we get on to the afternoon news around 4 o'clock, and we text each other back and forth. And I mean, we would watch a 2 hour segment. We have not been able to finish an hour for the past 6 months. It just makes you so ill. You say, I got to turn it off. I'm so frustrated to watch the criminality going on right in front of your eyes and the nonsense and the tearing down the White House. My God, this is I, you know I I don't know. But I can appreciate that German people just had to try to narrow their view and turn away because what was it's there were people who said, well, they didn't know about the Holocaust and all that stuff. You had slave laborers working alongside you. You knew what the hell was going on. But it's it's so difficult to accept truth that
Hmm.
your brain goes into denial. Um, uh, but no matter what you do, it doesn't change it. The reality is the reality.
Yeah, like you could start, if you were president, you could start a cryptocurrency company
Oh
and
God.
and
Oh
then
God.
and then pass laws favorable to cryptocurrency. You could do that.
You could do that. And you could say to anyone who wants something out of the US government, I think we could handle that if you pick up some cryptocurrency.
Exactly.
Yeah. But what does it say about the people who will vote out any Republican who is not 100% loyal to Trump?
You've got to, as I said, I'm not a political analyst, I'm a security analyst. So I'm straying out of what is my discipline to talk about that. But when I do look at politics, is you have to break things down into cohorts. What's this cohort? The people who do this. Um, the cohort of the uber loyal Republican voter who is a bigot, racist, is predominant. So if the candidate, you could have the worst person in the world running, but if they express that they are bigots and hate and hate people of color, they're going to vote for them. That's what was kind of unmasked with the current administration. And so what was the traditional Republican coalition sort of has broken up. And uh, look, that cohort of uh, bigotry resided in the Democratic Party from before the Civil War.
Well, it's still the Southern conservatives that just switched party after the Civil Rights Act of '64.
Right. So it's just important to understand that cohort
Yeah.
moved to another party.
Yeah.
Solely, I shouldn't say solely, but predominantly on the issue of race. Now, and they took over a party.
Yeah.
And there were other people outside of that party who recognized that cohort, knew it had power, and they knew how to agitate that power and to do it in a very sophisticated way where they were not overt, they were covert in how they did it. But if you dug into the meaning of their messages, it was very clear if you spent, time analyzing it. At the heart of this message is bigotry. And so you kind of see it growing over time. It didn't happen all at once. The Lee Atwater thing was a kind of a watershed moment, but it wasn't the end. It just kept going a little further. And so that ground was laid, and till the point that the money dominated, the money from bigotry dominated the party, and the party is now, controlled by it. So if any, again, when you look at primaries, it's those who are the most dedicated who are going to come to vote. But that doesn't mean that they're a majority in the country. Mind you, what also happens is that if you look at the voting population of our entire population, maybe a third votes for Democrats, another third votes for Republicans, and another third, a little bigger than another third, doesn't vote at all.
Yeah.
So even when the party, uh, let's say Republican Party, shed a lot of its followers by embracing the bigot wing of the Democratic Party, it could also then look at that other pack that didn't vote and try to find those who harbor deep bigoted resentments and try to harvest them into the party, which is what they did. So, yeah, I don't know if that answers the question, but that's the best I can do.
Is there any way out of here?
Well, I just have to say, I like the analogy with the alcoholic or drug addict. They got to hit bottom. And when you hit bottom, you start rebuilding. And many fail at that. The Roman Empire hit bottom and was never able to recover. All empires eventually have, devoured their own. We're probably on a path to extinction. But if we hit bottom and somehow there's a leadership that emerges of mature adults, we need a new constitution. I, you know, some of this stuff is so deeply embedded in the American population, it may not be fixable.
I mean, if you do a new constitution, forget about separation of church and state. It's going to be, yeah.
You know, there's a gazillion arguments as to why,
Yeah.
we can't do a new constitution. But, that would be a first step, assuming it was well done and well thought out. Look, Chile tried that after Pinochet was dumped, but you had powerful interests who were going to lose some power, who undermined it. So, none of this stuff is a guarantee. Often what I'm highlighting in a class is a problem and people would like a solution. I give what is the best off the top of my head, but don't take that as this is the answer. I don't have any idea what the answer is. I mean, all I can tell you is we're in a bucket filled with stuff we don't want to be in. And there's no quick shower going to get that stuff off. It's a bad situation.
Well, one way out is to let it go and move on to the four quarters. So what's going to happen in the fourth quarter?
Yeah. Well, if you think this class was depressing, wait till we get to the American Revolution. Everything you learned about the American Revolution is junk.
Which leads us, what is your next class in the fall?
It's going to be on the American Revolution.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
The so basically it's the American Revolution is revolting. The American Revolution is revolting is the basic premise?
Yeah. Well, basic premise is that it wasn't a revolution. It was purely a secession. Because nothing changed.
Yeah.
And it was a bunch of rich guys who got together and formed an agreement to stay together so they could continue getting richer and richer, and they did.
Absolutely. Britain came out with several directives and court cases that threatened the wealthiest people in America, and that's when they decided that we need to split from England. But they got rid of England, but nothing changed. They still had slavery. They still could perpetrate genocide. But not only could they still perpetrate genocide, but it's during the American Revolution that George Washington sends General Sullivan into the Iroquois nations to kill him. At least first win the revolution. Concentrate on one war at a time. No. We got to set the example, and they do. And so the genocide continued.
It's possible you should have said, Sal, that a bunch of rich folks got together and decided that boys who didn't have shoes should go with their little squirrel guns and shoot at the men with the red coats who were well trained in the use of armaments.
Bob, I try to make in the class a distinction between the leaders and the led. Because the leaders have their agenda. The led are manipulated into believing an agenda.
Right.
So, Sal, a question for you in that area then. Where do the loyalists fit in here? I thought the loyalists were the aristocratic class over here in the U.S. and wanted to continue on with England.
No, well, I would guess there were some loyalists who reached the level of wealth and power, but the real wealth and power of the country, Washington, Jefferson, Adams, Franklin, these were the people who were getting richer and wealthier by the day by taking Indian lands.
Yeah.
George, based on, well, this was several years ago, but based on, looking at how much wealth he had at that time and comparing it with today, would still be one of the richest people in the world. I mean, his land grabs were things like Kentucky. I mean, yeah, well, yeah, I think I'll take Kentucky. Ohio, all the best lands along the Ohio River. I mean, he took everything. And it was the great scam for George Washington was the Ohio Company. That was a land speculating company that when England said, okay, this piece of land is now ours, it doesn't belong to the Indians, they would then auction those lands off to speculators who would then subdivide it and sell it. And that's how the Ohio Company got rich. And those people were the Washingtons, Jeffersons, Franklins. So, yeah.
So be sure to tune in next fall to find about and have all your childhood love of the country just crushed.
Dissipate.
Yeah.
Well, thank you everyone for coming.
If everybody can give
warm
applause to Sal for another sobering presentation.
Yeah.
Hope you
thanks, Sal.
Thanks, Sal.
Hope you got something out of all of this.
And have a good summer.
Yeah.
Same to you. Let me see what happens.